Welcome to Paradelphia Radio. This is Rick Pruitt once again here in the Toxic Studios in beautiful downtown, wherever the hell we are. Have you figured out what town this is yet, Mike?
This is, well, it's a big debate over which one it is, but I like to call it Clementon. It is Clementon, New Jersey.
This is nowhere near Clementon.
Some people say it's Laurel Springs. It's a whole battle. You might look outside the window and there'll be like, pitch axes and pitchforks and all that kind of stuff, because it's a battle that's been going on for the ages.
I just assume they're coming for you.
They might be coming for me. I do have a lot of haters out there, and you know what? They hate us because they ain't us.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, so this week we have a topic that, I kind of came up with this a few weeks ago, and I've been looking up some information about this because I thought it was a really interesting take on a topic that I've honestly never heard before. Everybody, well, not everybody, but I'm sure many people love the movie and the books, Lord of the Rings. And what I found a few weeks ago was some information that suggested that possibly, Lord of the Rings was not the work of fantasy and fiction that everybody assumed that it was. And so I dug into this a little bit, and I found out some information that is, it's not overly compelling, but it is definitely interesting, and it'll make you think a little bit. And the interesting thing about this is that it kind of dovetails off into other topics, namely topics that involve breeding of early man with by aliens. The whole Zachariah Sitchin, ancient aliens style theory. So there is some of that in there. And this also works to push back the timeline of what everyone in the mainstream seems to think were the earliest humans. So it kind of plays to both angles, as well as gives a new take on the Lord of the Rings story.
I love that you've kind of gone down this path, because, what is Lord of the Rings other than just mystical stories of things that have come up in our past that are nothing more than what you've talked about before, folklore, or things that people say that they've seen in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. If you break it down like that, the characters and the and all the creatures in the film and in the book. Yeah, it's kind of like you could do a best of Paradelphia over the last 8 years and pick out different shows we've done where we've touched on things like magic and wizards and cryptozoology and dragons and whatever.
And dragons, and you could take it as far as to go with the elves in Lord of the Rings. They had elves, right?
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but elves are nothing more than, they've said that, like, certain times you've talked about fairies being for real, like Tinkerbell, for lack of a better way of explaining it. But what are elves other than just normal sized fairies? Well,
we had Varla Ventura on a couple years back, and she basically literally wrote a book on elves and fairies, and we went through all these different types of elves and fairies and how they are very specific to different countries and different cultures. Mm-hmm. Some of them are benign, some of them are very antagonistic and will look to harm you. So and again, much like the film or the book, that's kind of what's written into the literature too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's it's interesting. So I want to touch on that today and kind of dig into that a little bit and see what the listeners think. It's going to be a controversial kind of topic because some people are very, very, very into Lord of the Rings. It's kind of one of their staple, books that they read when they were growing up, or if you were a little bit younger, you probably saw the movie. Maybe you didn't read the books. But either way, it's loved by many people, but it's always, as far as I've ever heard, thought to just be total fantasy created by J.R.R. Tolkien. And this whole story starts out with Tolkien himself claiming that this is not a work of fantasy. So this isn't other people saying this. This is the actual writer of this of this story saying, no. This is not fantasy. This is something that is real or was real. All right. So basically what this is, I came across, sometimes I come across things like books or, articles or websites or whatever. I don't think I've ever taken a show idea and ran with it based on a Twitter stream feed. But in this case, I did, because this was where I came across it first. And, I want to credit the guy who created this feed and kind of led me down this rabbit hole. His name is Robert Kearney. He's a freelance writer, and he is at Rob Kearney 1981 or on Twitter. So if you want to follow him, you can do that. And he basically, about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I guess it was now, he kind of came through with this. Actually, you know what? I'm looking at this now. This is from last year. Oh, wow. It must have been retweeted. It was from August 15th, 2020. So if you're looking for when it was almost a year ago. So he comes through, and what he's saying here in this tweet, he says, millions have come to enjoy and love J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy, but few know that the author privately told many that these works were based on a true history of Europe, one which had been hidden from ordinary people for thousands of years. And although publicly being forced to claim these stories came from his experiences in the Great War, and in private, Tolkien was saying that he became enraged when people would call them fantasy. So basically what this is saying is that he, in his lifetime, when he was asked where these stories came from, he was told that these were places and these were people that he based on people that he met and places he went during World War I. I guess he was a soldier in World War I, and he said that was where he got the ideas for Lord of the Rings. But that was, it might have been the publisher. It doesn't state exactly who was forcing him to say this, but it may have been the publisher, because it just might have been too crazy. I mean, you got to think about this. This was back in the 1930s, I believe he started writing this, late 30s. They published it in the mid 50s. So, saying this was based on ancient history and trying to sell the books at the same time, you might have religious issues in there, depending on how conservative the readership was at the time. But basically, when he was asked in private, he got pissed, and he said, "No, this is not analogy or metaphor. This is what I learned from my reading." And so, what he came to tell people in private, he was a student at Oxford in England, and while he was a student at Oxford, what he claimed was that he discovered a bunch of old books in the basement of the school's library, and basically they were written in Scandinavian, in a Scandinavian language that nobody really understood, but he did. For whatever reason, he was able to translate these texts. I guess it was a language he took or knew. And he said they contained an account of life in Europe 6,500 years ago. And it was basically these books were all about this epic struggle for this ancient civilization that existed back then. Now, if you're talking about 6,500 years ago, what you're talking about is a totally different looking landmass. So when you look at the movie or pictures of maps of Middle Earth that supposedly that he put in the books and supposedly exist for like fan fiction or whatever it is for Lord of the Rings, and then look at something called Doggerland. Now, Doggerland was what Europe looked like back around that time, 6,500 or so years ago, because you had all of England and Scotland and that western half of Europe were connected. There was no English Channel separating France and England. All right, all that landmass was all together, from what these books are saying. Now, I don't know. That doesn't seem like a long enough time to me to move these land masses that far apart. When you talk about land masses moving apart like that, you're talking about millions of years to have that happen. So 6,500 years, while that's a hell of a long time, you're only talking about 3,500 BC. So you're talking about the time when, the Egyptians were building pyramids and whatnot. Or supposedly. That's a whole other question, but let's just go with that. So I don't know whether there was supposedly some kind of earthquake, volcano, some kind of physical, geological catastrophe that supposedly happened to split these land masses up or not. He doesn't state that, but he does state that this was back 6,500 years ago. And if you look at pictures of Doggerland and you look at pictures of Middle Earth, they're not exactly the same. You can't overlay one over the other, but it's similar. It's fairly similar. So it's one of those things that you kind of have to, I guess, put common sense aside for a second and just run with it, because I don't know. Maybe he just made up the 6,500 years. Maybe that's true, and he made up the maps, one or the other. But the story itself is the point, really, not the maps, but the story. And these books, like I said, were written in ancient Scandinavian. Tolkien could translate them, so he did. He reportedly was friends with another writer named C.S. Lewis, who's a fairly famous writer himself. And he told C.S. Lewis at one point, he said, there's a whole history that we don't even know about. All right, so there's a little article here that's talking about this, and it quotes a couple of, let's see here. Oh, he's talking about, okay, the Lord of the Rings, and like I just said, he talked to C.S. Lewis about the whole history they don't know, and he told people in his letters that Lord of the Rings was from 6,500 years ago, and that the Irish were represented in the books by the hobbits, and the elves were supposedly the Nords, like from Norway and Sweden and whatnot. So that was the idea behind the characters in the movie. He didn't call them Irish and Nordic. He renamed them, and he designated them as I guess cryptozoological creatures in the books, but that's who they were supposed to have been. So basically, at this point, he has all these characters. There's similarities between Tolkien's Middle Earth races and ancient Celts. If you look at even stuff right down to the Shire, where the hobbits were living, this was very similar to pictures of early Celtic settlements. Right, the Shire was kind of, if you remember the movie, was kind of built into it was a doorway, an entranceway built into a little hill. Oh yeah, that's Mike's bringing up a picture of Doggerland here on the screen. So this is what Doggerland looked like before that land masses broke apart or sunk. It looks to me like they probably sunk, because that looks like it's land that is already separated, but the land that's connecting them is still above water. So this may have been an issue, or not an issue, an event that caused this split of all these places. Not to bring another total different subject into this, but this could have been the flood, the biblical flood. Could have been the event which caused the land that you don't see to sink under the water, under the North Atlantic and the English Channel and so forth. All right, and then this is a picture of Middle Earth. So again, it doesn't look point for point, but it's not so very far off. And again, those of you that are listening to this, obviously you can't see this, but we'll try and post. I'll try and post all the pictures, because it is interesting. So I'll try and post all the pictures on our show notes so you guys can see this. But as far as the building structures, the shires, they were built into the sides of these little mounds, and they were just an entryway, a doorway, and the front of the building, and then in the mound was the main part of the house. Well, if you look at ancient Celtic settlements, basically they were built as almost like grass and dirt teepees, which had a door in them, but the structure was covered by a mound. Now, they weren't built into a hill. It wasn't a mound that was built into a hill like the Shires in the movie or the book. But again, it was within striking distance of being close enough that he probably took from the history to write that part of the story. So again, the elves were the Nordics, like the Viking type races. The wizards, like Gandalf, you had druid priests that were part of the Celtic culture that were very, very, very powerful. Whether they actually possessed real magic or not is up for debate. But again, among the Celtic people, these shaman or wizards had a lot of power and wielded a lot of power. And so if you're going to compare apples to apples here, then you're going to have to say that, Gandalf was probably a comparison with one of these druid priests. But beyond Tolkien's own private recollections, beyond his own word on this, you do have a little bit of modern science that kind of backs this up a little bit. All right, so we've had, science has shown that, the ancient world was full of various hominid species, and they were associated with mankind and humankind and modern man, and they were interbreeding with each other. So when you talk about all these creatures like these orcs and all these other things that were in that movie, it's not so very far-fetched, or the hobbits themselves. You had you have ancient humans that were interbred with Neanderthals. There's a story in Metro. In fact, Mike has it pulled up here on for anybody watching. A story from Daily Mail reporter Metro.co.uk. It was back from 2013, but this does mention ancient humans rampantly interbred with Neanderthals and a mystery species in Lord of the Rings style world of different creatures. And this article goes on to say a prehistoric Lord of the Ring type world once existed on Earth with a number of different species interbreeding and populating the globe at the same time. Extensive interbreeding between members of ancient human-like groups is thought to have produced a number of different subspecies living across Europe and Asia between 30,000 and 50,000 years ago. Scientists say new genome sequences from two extinct human relatives, Neanderthals and Denisovans, suggest these archaic groups bred with anatomically modern humans and with each other more extensively than previously thought. All right, and there's another article here talking about human ancestors interbred with related species. This is from, I think this is World News, I believe. And it says, our ancestors bred with other species in the Homo genus, according to a study published today in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. The authors say that up to 2% of the genomes of some modern African populations may originally have come from a closely related species. Paleontologists have long wondered whether modern humans came from a single genetically isolated population of hominins or whether we are genetically mixed with various hominin species. Last year, an analysis comparing the Neanderthal genome sequence to that of modern humans showed that some interbreeding did take place between the two species between 80 and 30,000 years ago. So again, there's the natural aspect of this. There's the natural breeding between these two related species. But then you also have the theory, I mentioned this at the top of the show, you also have the theory that's thrown out there that you had alien intervention. And this is, people kind of roll their eyes at this, but to be honest with you, I've been reading a little bit about this lately, and it's not so crazy when you read the literature and you see the science behind it. Our species went from basically, smart chimpanzees to fairly modern human beings in a very short space of time, geologically. So that doesn't just happen. You don't have cats turning into cat people within 1,000 years or whatever. So it's something you have to kind of look at and go, okay, well, this happened. This is scientifically proven that we went from point A to point B really rapidly. So how did that happen? And if you say it was just basically genetics and like Darwinian natural selection, I mean, that takes a hell of a lot longer than 1,000 or so years to do that. 1,000 years ago, we were in the Middle Ages. People weren't, they didn't have the education or the sanitation or, whatever that we have today. But physically, we were exactly the same. We weren't any different physically as those people. So to say that it all happened in 1,000 years, I mean, that's a stretch. So something had to have happened. Something had to have intervened somehow. And it becomes more and more and more plausible that there was a third party involved. So if that was the case, if that really did happen, then again, going back to this whole theory of all these, creatures that could have populated this this time period when this history that Tolkien is talking about, these could have been genetically modified human beings or maybe something else altogether. I'm not saying that there were literal orcs running around on Earth, but at the same time, it could have been something similar. Yeah, Mike's giving the thumbs down. You don't believe in the orcs, do you, Mike?
I want orcs. No, I want.
Oh, you want orcs?
I want the orcs. God damn it!
I mean, again, he doesn't state literally what the orcs, whether the orcs were part of this, but
here's what's crazy about this episode. I hate to interject, and you're
go
doing
ahead.
such a great job of explaining and kind of making the points that you want to get across to everybody. But it's crazy that the one episode that you do about Lord of the Rings,
mm-hmm.
and if it was based off of real events that occurred, is the one where you're literally making the most sense to me. I'm sitting here going, yeah, that makes logical sense. And it's dead serious. Like, I've sat here through so many episodes where it's like, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, that's a good, cool way to look at it. But this one, I'm like really looking at you going, he's on to something.
293 shows, it finally did it.
That
Huh?
was it.
There we go.
This is the one. Congratulations. Mazel tov. Somebody popped the champagne.
So going along that same line, I think it was 2013 or 2014. Big news was made when they found what they called the Hobbit in Indonesia. So what this was, the remains have so far only been discovered in one place in Indonesia, but various legends of similar beings have come from all around the world. So if you remember this was a skeleton that was found in Indonesia. Or it may have just been the skull. I forget if it was just a skull or if it was a skull in different parts of the skeleton. But it was found about 8 years ago or so, and it was far, far smaller than human beings should be. And so this is an AP story about this. That's a skull there Mike's showing. It says, an astonishing discovery that could rewrite the history of human evolution. Scientists say they have found the skeleton of a new human species, a dwarf, marooned for eons in a tropical lost world while modern humans rapidly colonize the rest of the planet. The finding on a remote Indonesian island has stunned anthropologists like no other in recent memory. It is fundamentally a new creature that bears more of a resemblance to fictional barefooted hobbits than modern humans. Yet, biologically speaking, it may have been closely related to us, and perhaps even shared caves with our ancestors. So what you had was this skull that was found, and based on the skull and the teeth, I don't know the ins and outs of anthropology, but they can take very little and tell you a lot about the creature that it came from. So they can tell you that the diet it had and the life it led and so forth. And what this is basically a creature that stood about half the size of a modern man. So you're talking about 3 feet tall-ish, somewhere around there.
But at the same time, like, sorry to interrupt again.
No, okay.
But at the same time, like, isn't it just the same thing as a today's dwarf? Like, what makes it so different?
But would you have had a population of them all living in one place?
I mean, genetics, a dwarf, aren't they? If you have two dwarves, aren't they more likely? I mean, they can have normal size children, but aren't they more likely to have dwarves themselves? Which then, if your family's unit stays together, that creates the colony.
I mean, I guess it could be, but I know that they designated, like, dwarves would be designated as Homo sapiens, regardless of their size.
Right.
And I think that has to do with bone structure and the teeth and a few other things in the skull, the jaw, so forth.
Okay.
These were designated as Homo florientus. So this was designated as something other than Homo sapiens.
Okay.
All right. So this wasn't just like Homo sapien dwarves. This was another type creature that was close to us, but not exactly us, and yet small like that, like a hobbit.
Gotcha.
All right. So this is now part of our history, and I'm sorry, it's 2003. I thought it was 2013. It's 2003. These were found. But again, it plays into were these creatures more widely spread out than just in Indonesia. That's where this particular skull was found. But it doesn't mean that was the only place on Earth where these things existed. And again, so if you're talking about going back to the Lord of the Rings story and the hobbits, is it possible that these things lived in Europe at the same time as all these other things were going on? Doggerland was there, and you had these other creatures, and you possibly had this interbreeding with different species, and you possibly even had this alien intervention where you had basically gene splicing and all the genetics that that we think is brand new today. Like, people go crazy over genetic testing and how we can genetically modify embryos and make a cow or a sheep out of a couple of cells nowadays. But is this really new, or is this just rediscovering a lost technology that someone had way back when? It's an interesting question, and this all plays into this. So I would love to get my hand. Like, I don't know. There's a translation of these texts that Tolkien read, and I would love to see some of it at least. I don't know if I would. I can't read Scandinavian, so it would have to be translated. But I would love to see at least some of it and see how closely this compares to the Lord of the Rings. Like, did he read this and then say, "Well, I'm just going to change the names, to protect the innocent, and call these elves and call these orcs and call these whatever hobbits, and retell that story?" Because again, he mentions that the story he read, the actual history, involved like this battle, this fight for control of that whole continent, which is basically what Lord of the Rings is all about. You had this struggle between all these different groups, and you had these two sides, the good and evil, all that stuff, for control of the Middle Earth, the world as they saw it.
I thought it was control of the ring.
Well, the ring would control Middle Earth.
Ah.
So that was, it was one and the same.
It was one ring.
One ring to, well, that's a big ring.
To rule them all.
One ring to put around all their necks, apparently. So now it goes on to talk about different characters in the film and in the book, and they mention Sauron. All right, the bad guy, the ultimate evil in Lord of the Rings. And so this says, what about Lord of the Rings' main antagonist, Sauron? He is most likely based on the historic figure of Sargon of Akkad, who himself may have been a composite of a number of different people. This figure literally invented the concept of time and the rules which our modern world runs on. So it says here, this is the Lord of the Rings, like so Saturn. And Saturn, the planet, has rings. So you got to follow me with this one. So there's this Lord of the Rings like Saturn, and his name is Sauron. So Saturn was one of the gods of, I believe it was Rome. One of the gods of Rome was Saturn. So Sauron, Saturn, he's obviously close to the Mesopotamian dictator Sargon, who invented time, and he literally invented clocks, calendars, schedules, and really delivered the world into a linear, monochromatic world that we live in now. So this Sargon basically is someone who invented time. Not time itself, if you understand, but the way to process time, the way to understand time. I suppose before that, people just kind of lived in the moment, kind of like animals, do, and they don't, a dog doesn't have a calendar.
Sounds so nice.
Yeah. And here's the thing, though. It sounds like he did something good, but if you think about it, really think about it, did he? By doing this, did he really do did he do us any favors by putting time out there as a measurable thing? Because now all people do is they get driven nuts by time. Mm-hmm. You're waiting to get older. You're waiting to for the weekend. You're waiting for the end of the day. No one lives in the moment, and that's one of the things everybody tells you now. You got to live in the moment. You got to live in the moment, but you can't because you're constantly looking at a damn clock and a calendar. So, if you want to call that the ultimate evil, I guess you can. It in a way, I suppose you can. But it says Tolkien understood this and is trying to show us that this Saurian power, and they question whether this is alien power, came in and forced us into a kind of slavery, wrecking the planet, destroying the planet, using up all its energy for its own devices. So much like Sauron in the movie and in the book wants to control all the power via the ring, he's questioning whether this deity who lived way back then, and dictator who lived back then that took the name Sargon, was doing the same thing as Sauron in the movie. So again, it's a stretch. I get that it's a stretch, but yet the names are very similar. The situation is very similar.
It's a stretch.
Is it a stretch?
It's a stretch, but it's one of those stretches where certain aspects of the stretch make you go, wait a second. Like it has too many overlapping parts that sound too similar. So even as you're speaking, I'm like, it's a fucking stretch, but there's something there. Like
what I have here are broad strokes. I haven't dug very deeply on this because I didn't find anything very deep to dig. But even the broad strokes kind of make you go,
But just like with anything else, when you're going that far back into history, if it was based off of anything real, that's all you're going to have are the broad strokes. You're not going to have absolute details.
Right.
I mean, again, it's just like anything else. Any other books that go that far back, it's the thing that they say about the Bible all the time. Like, you try and tell a story for that many years, for that many hundreds and thousands of years over and over again until it gets written down. It's going to change because you tell somebody to tell somebody else to tell somebody else to tell somebody else something. By the time that person down the line, the 50th person, the story's got all disconstrued.
Yeah.
So
the telephone game. Yeah.
There you go.
So this history of the world that was written in Scandinavia and the one that Tolkien read basically stated that the time before Sauron or Sargon, if you want to call him Sargon or Sauron in the story, men lived more in harmony with themselves and nature because psychic abilities and spiritual gifts were abundant. After Sauron, or Sargon, imposed his corrupt system, our minds became imprisoned by the artificial reality it created, and these were lost. Now, the artificial reality it created could mean the issue where he invented the time and the calendar and clocks and so forth. Or it could be talking about something else entirely that we've mentioned quite a few times on the show, where we talk about how we are literally creating our own reality. So if people were doing that beforehand, if people had these abilities, these psychic abilities, these supernatural abilities, and they just kind of did. It's almost like it's almost like telling somebody they can fail. You ever hear that quote? What would you do if you didn't think you could fail? You know. So if these people had these abilities and never for a second thought otherwise, and he came along, this Sargon came along, and imposed this these doubts in these people's head. He gave them a time system, a linear time system, and said, you know, this is how long you have to live. This is how long you have in a day. This is how, you know, this is you now. You're on the clock now.
Mm-hmm.
And he may have imposed a situation where he told these people that reality is reality, and you can't do this. And I'm not sure how that would have manifested. I don't know what exactly it is that he would have done to do that. But if he did, if he got in these people's heads, then once you get in their head, then you start to doubt your own abilities, and you know,
absolutely,
you fall off the bike, so to speak.
You've got my brain. This whole conversation has got my brain frantically going over the thought process of like not having time, not having months, not having days, not having birthdays,
right?
Not looking at somebody and saying they're this many years old,
right.
Just they're here.
How old are you? I don't know. What's that even mean?
That doesn't mean anything, like,
right?
The whole concept of time, like what time is it? We're just here. We're just living. We're just doing.
How many people feel bad, physically feel bad, because they know how old they are? And
Absolutely.
And if you didn't know, if that wasn't a thing, if you didn't know you were 40, 50, 80, if you didn't know, would it make you feel better? Would you feel like you just were? Like, I understand you age and you look different than you did years ago.
Right.
But you also don't have the concept of, oh my God, people only live this long on average. So when you get to be 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, you start to think, uh-oh, the sand's running out on my clock. Or if you didn't have that concept, you don't know.
You just keep going.
You just keep going.
Yeah. There had to have been a study of some kind where they put individuals, I know this kind of sounds messed up, but you raise a child without the concept of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a bubble of some kind, or in a housing complex of some kind, under study, where you don't have the concept of numbers and you don't have the concept of time. I wonder if that has ever been done, and if it hasn't, if it was done, what the outcome would be. Like, okay, teach them language, whatever the language is of the country that is performing this experiment, but don't teach them time. Don't teach them numbers, money, any of that kind of things that you have to deal with. Don't teach them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and anything that goes with that, any concepts that go with that. That would be super interesting to see how human beings would be without that concept. Yeah. I mean, hell, we lose our shit when it's daylight savings time, which they're trying to get rid of. I mean, I would love to know. Yeah,
I mean, I know that I don't know how hard of a sell that would be with little kids, and you have to wait a long time for it to kind of manifest itself. But when you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, you could probably do that with somebody with amnesia.
Well, you could absolutely do it with somebody with amnesia, and I know you're touting the line of like quote unquote child abuse because you're raising this individual who is not a participant, a willful participant in this little experiment you're doing. But at the end of the day, is that experiment isn't anywhere near as bad as some of the experiments we've done in our militaries at times of war and stuff like that.
Right.
And it does suck. You're taking something, you feel like you're taking something away from that person to grow up with that concept.
Right.
But to find out what the outcome would be so friggin' interesting.
Belief is a powerful thing. And,
the sheer fact, I know this is going so off the rails of Lord of the Rings, but the sheer fact that you this goes into the realm of pot talk. Hey, 420 just passed. But the whole idea that we have created time and digits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 only means something because we created that. Time 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock only means something because we created it.
Right.
There is no such thing of it as it, only the idea that we have all bought into. And because we all agree on it is what makes it a reality. If we all stopped agreeing on it, it would go away. The same idea with money. The only reason why money even means anything is because we
give it a value.
But we all agree. Yeah. We all agree to give it a value.
Right.
If we decided to just not, which would never happen collectively, then it would never mean anything. Words mean nothing because it's only vibrations coming out of our throat through our mouths,
right,
that we have created and dictated what that means to have communication. We could communicate with our hands. We could do sign language. We could do Morse code. We could do anything, but we decided to do it this way. So many things don't mean anything. And like you were saying at the beginning of the show, our evolution was like, in the grand scheme of things, was the snap of your fingers,
right,
going from, ape creatures to what we are today. It's so fascinating, so crazy, and it just makes you realize when you take a step back and look at it, like you were saying just a second ago, where he put this in place to put doubt in your mind. When you take a step back and take away all that stuff, the doubt in your mind goes away also.
Right.
Because it at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything. We made it all up.
Ignorance is bliss.
We made it all up. Everything that we see and do, we made it all up. One thing that I always think is amazing is every single thing you see on a daily basis was made out of stuff from the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the microphone in front of your face, whether it's the monitors I'm looking at, whether it's the computer, the table, the shoes, the pants, everything came from the earth that we just decided to make and decided this is what it is. Jesus Christ, somebody give me a joint.
No, it's true. I mean, it's one of those things where, you like I said, ignorance is bliss. Somebody decided a long, long time ago that one revolution around the sun was 1 year. And we all said, okay. What's to say you couldn't say 2 revolutions were 1 year, and we're half the age that we claim we are now. If somebody told me I was 25, I'd be like, cool. I got like another 50 years to go. Easy.
Absolutely.
So, and if I believe that, if I truly believe that, if it wasn't just something I'm goofing around with here, if it was something that I literally believed in my head, would I be able to do that? Would I be able to physically manifest health in my body, when I'm now when I'm quote unquote 75 and feel like I'm 50 or 48 or whatever it may be, Yeah. Again, belief is a powerful thing.
100%. 100%.
So getting back to the story here, if this Sargon, he created doubt in the minds of these people that had these abilities, that would qualify as ultimate evil. I mean, it may not be, Sauron in the movie on the whatever it was, the mountain with the evil eye, but it would be pretty damn close. Yeah, there he is. So, all right. So this goes on to talk about some of the characters in the movie. Again, orcs. We mentioned orcs earlier. It says orcs and other creatures represented in Lord of the Rings likely were other hominid species. We already talked about that. Sauron's eye. So I mentioned this a second ago. Sauron's eye, which was on top of that, I guess it was that mountain or precipice or whatever it was in the movie. It is definitely Saturn or some form of Saturn's cube used to enslave humans and other species, blinding them to the truth. Now, they mention this as being part of Saturn's cube, and you wonder what the hell they're talking about, Saturn's cube. Well, as of a year or 2 ago, we had a probe that went by Saturn and found, lo and behold, on the North Pole of Saturn, there was a hexagonal figure, a hexagonal structure, like a storm in the shape of a hexagon, or in other words, a cube on the northern tip of Saturn. Saturn being a closely related phonetically to Sauron or Sargon, it makes you wonder. There's all these little connections, and we didn't know about this cube until what, 2 years ago or something, 3 years ago, whenever that was. So again, these are things that he read in this book that was, this old ancient history, and he read it back in the 30s. We didn't have a clue what Saturn even truly looked like, I don't think, in the 30s. I don't think we'd even seen the rings yet at that point. I'm not sure about that, but I don't think so. We certainly didn't see the hexagon pattern. So again, you can look at this and go, these are coincidences. Yeah, maybe. Maybe, or maybe not. So unfortunately, unlike the ending of Lord of the Rings, the real world equivalent of Sauron won, and we are now stuck in the matrix he and modern elites descended from him have kept us in. One day, man will hopefully get his collective self out of it, but much work needs to be done. So basically, at the end of the day, what they're saying here is that the world we live in now is the world that was created back then by this Sargon, because obviously we still have time and we still have calendars and so forth to kind of limit us time-wise and longevity-wise. And we also don't all have these, psychic abilities. Or we do, but we don't know how to access them because it's been generation upon generation upon generation since this happened. And it's kind of been, I guess, mentally and emotionally bred out of us to believe that this stuff is real. All this stuff we talk about on this show, the hashtag I have for this show is what if it's all true? And that's not, I don't put that out there lightly because, again, you come across situations like this and it makes you wonder, what if it's all true? Yeah, there we go. Mike's putting up a little chart here where it talks about ancient symbols representing Saturn. The south pole of Saturn looks like an eye, and the ring obviously around Saturn is reminiscent of the ring in Lord of the Rings, and Sauron being close to Saturn. So again, you have these connections that are, and then of course you had the cube on top of Saturn that we talked about a minute ago. So you have these connections that, again, maybe it's stretching, but if this was written into this ancient Scandinavian history from hundreds of years ago, before they were able to literally put eyes on Saturn, really, then where did they get this information? It kind of, we haven't talked about this very much, but it kind of is the same as like the Dogon tribe down in Africa that knew that Sirius had a sister star, and they worshipped this sister star that wasn't visible from Earth. Well, how did they know that? When we finally got telescopes a couple 100 years ago, 150 years ago, whatever it was, then we saw it. Then we saw the second star, but we didn't see it till then. And these tribes have been worshiping this for 1,000 years. How is that possible? It makes you wonder. And then we talk about things like alien intervention, and you say, "Well, that's crazy." Is it though? Is it? Because this information got to these people somehow, and it got to them by people that knew about these celestial bodies like Saturn, like the Sirius star. So again, like I said, this kind of ties a couple different topics together. It's not just about the story of Lord of the Rings. It's about all these things kind of tying in together into this story. And ultimately, you tie that up with a little bow and you present it and you say, you know what? There's reasonable doubt here. If we're in a court case, there's reasonable doubt here. At least there's enough here to look deeper into this and investigate this a little bit further and kind of dig a little farther down the rabbit hole and kind of try to figure out, what? Maybe this is real. Maybe Tolkien really did read this history and really did base this story on facts that were going on thousands and thousands of years ago on Earth, specifically over in Europe. So that's pretty much the case for it as far as I have. Like I said, I went over a lot of wide brushstrokes. There wasn't anything that you could drop dead and say, look, this is definitely proof positive. There was no ringing bell or whatever or proof positive. Like I said, proof positive. But at the same time, I think there's enough there to put some doubt in your mind, and when you see those movies and when you read that book, maybe you're reading a history book. Names are changed, places are changed, but maybe what you're reading is actually a history book. You know what I'm saying, Mike?
I can't believe it. You've convinced me. I really do think this is one of the shows that hit home for me. I really liked it, and it's interesting to say the least.
Yeah, definitely something to think about. You'll never watch that movie the same again.
I want to go watch it right now. You definitely have piqued my interest into Jesus Christ. How long does it take to watch all of the movies back to back?
Oh, it's a
3
good
days,
7 hours, 8 hours. Yeah,
yeah. You're basically taking away, as we talk about time. You're taking away a day of my life. Well, then you go watch the movie again.
Then you got to first you got to watch The Hobbit. Right,
Jesus Christ,
The Hobbit. Isn't there a second Hobbit movie?
There probably is.
There's three. Three Hobbit movies. Oh wow,
it's too many.
This is like Star Wars. There's three Hobbit movies. There's three Lord of the Rings stories.
And I'm telling you, Laura's probably pissed off that I don't know all this shit, but I don't know what to tell you.
All right, so that's your mind-blowing for the night.
Yeah.
All right.
Whew.
So we're going to wrap things up here, but we'll be back next week with an all-new show. Some more mind-blowing facts and figures. Something to make you go, hmm. All right, so for Mikey Mike and Jamie in the control room, I'm Rick Pruitt. This has been Paradelphia, and we are out of here.